Welcome to Time of Death. This video is for informational purposes and in no way meant to glorify or condone violence. In today's video, we'll be discussing the murder of Patrick Lister. Lister died on Friday, May 18, 2012, 4 days after he was stabbed in the 8100 block of South Avalon Boulevard in Florence, according to LA County coroner records. John Armstrong, Cedric Scott, Nathaniel Willard, and Curtis Lowe were subsequently arrested and charged with the murder. The following is the evidence at trial. On May 14, 2012, defendants Armstrong and Scott, members of the Swan's criminal street gang, were standing in front of the 3-Star Market with several other Swan's members, including defendant Willard and Mitchell Johnson. Victim Patrick Lister was walking toward the market when defendants Scott and Armstrong hit him up and asked where he was from. The victim did not respond. He walked past defendants Scott and Armstrong and entered the market. They followed the victim into the market and confronted him just inside the doorway. Defendant Scott tore a gold chain from the victim's neck and ran out of the market, taunting him. The victim pursued defendant Scott with his arms extended. Scott threw a punch at the victim. Armstrong ran over and punched the victim. Scott pocketed the chain. A group of Swan's members surrounded the victim and began beating him. Defendant Lowe was not present when the incident started. He ran from across the street and joined the group surrounding the victim after the altercation began. Lowe's sister came out of a laundromat behind the market and saw the man beating the victim. She recognized the victim as the brother of her close childhood friend. The sister grabbed Lowe by the neck and yelled, "What are y'all doing? That's Veronica's brother." She told the gang members to get off the victim and the group broke apart. Defendant Scott returned the chain to the victim. The sister saw blood on the victim's shirt and told him he was leaking. The victim's chest was covered in blood. The victim died on May 17, 2012. From a 6-inch deep stab wound to the left side of his chest that pierced his heart. The wound would have required the use of significant force. The victim also sustained a 3-inch deep non-fatal stab wound to his lower back. There were no defensive wounds to his hands. The victim was 5 feet 9 inches tall, and his weight was estimated at approximately 170 to 180 pounds. Officers recovered a gold chain with a broken clasp from the victim's car. Portions of the attack on the victim were recorded on the market's video surveillance cameras. The videos show numerous Swan members at the scene, including Armstrong, Scott, Willard, and Johnson, greeting one another and shaking hands. The video displays Armstrong and Scott approaching the victim. Scott is shown ripping the chain from the victim and running away while holding it over his head. The victim is seen chasing him with his arms extended toward the chain. Scott throws a punch at the victim's direction and then shoves the chain into his pocket. Armstrong also throws a punch in the victim's direction, and then all 3 men move out of the camera's range. Officers interviewed defendant Lowe's sister and Johnson. Johnson stated that everybody out there was from Swan's. He saw defendants Scott and Armstrong fighting the victim. Johnson said that defendant Lowe stabbed the victim, but he didn't actually see the stabbing. When Johnson got off the school bus that day, Lowe flashed a little palm knife that flipped open. It was a little bit longer than 5 inches. Defendant Lowe didn't just show the knife to Johnson, he showed it to everybody. The police arrested defendant Willard on June 8, 2012. In a recorded conversation while Willard was in custody, he admitted to a confidential informant that he was present at the incident. Willard stated that he was a Swan's member and he saw the fight between defendant Scott and the victim. Defendant Lowe stabbed the victim, and Armstrong was also involved. Scott returned the chain to the victim when the fight ended. He saw the victim bleeding from the stabbing. LAPD officer Bobby Romo, assigned to the gang enforcement, testified regarding the Swans, a blood criminal street gang with over 400 active members. The Swans members primarily wear red. Their symbol is a swan. Based on tattoos, admissions, and their habits and associations, Officer Romo opined that defendants Scott, Lowe, Armstrong, and Willard were members of the Swans. Given a hypothetical tracking the facts of this case, Officer Romo opined that the murder would have been committed for the benefit of, at the direction of, and in association with the gang. Lowe, Scott, Armstrong, and Willard were tried jointly. Armstrong has a separate direct appeal pending. The court granted defendant Willard's request for dismissal. Subsequent to his dismissal from the case, Willard was called as a witness by the prosecution. Following the trial, the jury found defendants guilty of second-degree murder. It found true the special allegation that the murder was committed while engaged in the crime of robbery, including a gang enhancement. The court sentenced defendants to 15 years to life in prison, plus 10 years each on the gang allegations. Patrick Lister was 31 years old at the time of death.